Debbie Meyer again mentioned when she was here that, and she's also written about this, that how can we change the achievement gap and close that gap when we're not addressing the employment gap and the health gap, economic gap. John Alter in Newsweek, who's fairly progressive, wrote that that's an abdication on the part of educators by, rather than a pragmatic a statement of reality. Where would you find yourself on that continuum?
Well, you know, if you look at, one of the things I looked at when I was in Cambridge, which is a very rich city, but it's very diverse and predominantly minority school district. When you looked at the black kids coming into the school district and the white kids coming into the school district, they were apart by a gigantic gap before they arrived in kindergarten. And the school district really didn't widen that gap, but it didn't narrow it either. It just perpetuated it. And that's what pretty good school districts typically do. One of the problems is school is a limited treatment. You know, we've treated school as if it's an all-powerful treatment of inequality since the Reagan administration, because they didn't want to do anything about race or poverty or urban segregation or anything else. They just wanted to blame it on the schools and expect the schools to do it all by themselves. And that's been the dogma in both federal and state policy ever since. Just require the schools to do it and punish them if they don't do it. And none of them actually do it on a systemic basis. So the reality is most of kids' lives are outside of schools. A lot of the inequalities are formed before school starts. Even when schools do a good job, poor kids lose during the summer and middle-class kids gain during the summer because of different kinds of opportunities that they have. Those are realities. You know, we're the only country that really tries to deal with poverty simply by education, and does it in a way that puts the poor kids in school with a lot of other poor kids so they don't get positive peer group effects, and with the least experienced teachers and the most limited curriculum and the most arduous test-driven processes. I think that the trick about this is to find what's a reasonable middle way of thinking about this. Because schools obviously do make a difference. Everybody in this room knows that schools have made a difference to them in some way or another. But they don't change everything. They tend to perpetuate inequalities unless they're really remarkable schools. We need to address poverty. During the period when the gaps were really closing, we had a war on poverty. The war on poverty was shut down in the early 80s. We used to have our income distribution has become much, much more unequal during this period. We know that parent education is a huge effect on how well kids do in school, but we don't really do anything about adult education. You know, we have to think about this more broadly than just the schools. One of the papers that we're working on right now is about looking at how every other country does a lot more to eliminate child poverty than we do, every other advanced industrial country. We do very little. You know, in France, for example, and there was a book describing this, they eliminate about 90% of child poverty by supporting the families. And they also provide free daycare for all children, and they also provide health care for everybody. That's a relatively standard kind of diagnosis in the more progressive parts of Europe, most of which have lower incomes than we have in our society. We don't do any of those things, and we think the schools can do it all, and yet we put the kids who need the most in the most disadvantaged schools. It can't work. It can't work to eliminate the achievement gaps by itself without changing several of those features. That's not to say the schools don't make a difference. They do make a difference. We should figure out ways to measure how well they're doing within the range of things they can do. One of our colleagues, Russell Rumberger, did a paper on the southern schools, and he estimated about 1/4 of the differences in school achievement were due to things schools did, and 3/4 of them were due to things that happened outside of schools. We got to figure out what's a reasonable way to think whether the school's doing its part, and then to think about challenging the other parts of the society to do their part. And of course, I'm rewarding and supporting those school people who can do much more than that, those people who have remarkable capacities. But to think we can do it without a social policy and really equalize on a large scale is silly. Nobody has done that.
For more information, visit hightechhigh.org.